Welcome to my final mini lecture on Octavia Butler's Parable the Sower. And I'm going to look specifically at chapter 25 and meditate on how Butler challenges us to reconceptualize work. At the novel's conclusion, the collective led by Lauren Olamina reach Bancol's land. And as I suggested in my previous mini lecture, I think Butler sets the narrative up for us to assume this is going to be a utopia, that finally all the horrors and the violences of this fallen world, due to the capitalist scene, due to climate change, will somehow be left behind to some extent in this utopian space. But instead, when this collective reaches Bancol's land, they find a scene of horror. We found skulls, 3 in what was left of the house and 2 outside. There were scattered bones, but not one complete skeleton. Everyone in Bancol's family has been brutally murdered. They've entered a site of violence, a despoiled, a terrorized space, which might seem to suggest that this utopian project has been killed, has been squashed, that this site of violence can no longer be imagined as a utopia where utopian social relations can flourish. Initially, when Lauren says we can build a community here, multiple voices within this collective challenge that logic. On page 319, Zahara argues, quote, anything we build anywhere is a target. Again, this is already marked as an unsafe space, a space that has been home to violence, upon which violence has been wrought. And as Zahara said, it is very likely that in the future, this will be a space of violence again. This is not a space upon which community can be constructed. But Lauren challenges this skeptical, cynical logic. On page 321, Lauren retorts, quote, there are no guarantees anywhere, but if we're willing to work, our chances are good here. There's so many profound insights in Lauren's articulation. The first is that we need to dispel ourselves of this notion that there's a utopia that's guaranteed for social relations to flourish. There's no guarantees anywhere. But I think what's really essential is that, again, there's no guarantees, but more importantly, this insistence that if we're willing to work, their chances are good. And this value and privileging of work, rather than community being something that's found or given, or a utopian that's discovered, work proves central. But as I want to suggest in these final moments, this is not work as imagined by capitalism, as colonized by capitalism. In fact, this is a type of work that becomes delinked from a capitalist logic of labor. This passage continues, I've got some seed in my pack. We can buy more. What we have to do at this point is more like gardening than farming. And I love this ending for multiple reasons. One, the philosophy of earthseed becomes material. The key to building a community, to building a better world, begins with seeds, begins with transforming our own relationship to the surrounding ecological world, to the surrounding web of life. The key to building the community is having a relationship with the soil, a dialogue with the soil. It begins with seed. So again, we could see, and maybe re-see, earthseed is not just this kind of metaphoric, philosophical project, but something that takes on a real materiality and ecological foundation because of this recognized centrality of seeds to building community. And the other point I want to emphasize is Lauren's other point that we need to think of the work we're going to do more like gardening than farming. And that's a really interesting distinction to think about. To generalize a bit, in the early 21st century, when this novel is set, or maybe mid 21st century, no, it's I guess still early 21st century, farming has become a capitalist corporate entity, right? To use the land to maximize profit, to abuse the land until the soil is ruined. But Lauren imagines a different type of work with soil, which is closer to gardening. The passage continues, quote, everything will have to be done by hand, composting, watering, weeding, picking worms or slugs or whatever off the crops, and killing them one by one if that's what it takes. And here becomes the key distinction. The difference between farming and gardening is how our body relates to either activity. Again, in the middle of the 21st century, when this science fiction novel is set, farming is a corporate, machine driven activity. But gardening is something done by hand, something that becomes an embodied practice of care and of love. And this brings us back to Lauren's initial insight when this collective enters this land and encounters all the violence, and she insists we can build a community here. And again, she says if we're willing to work, our chances are good here. I think we've two things. One, we, the dominant culture, romanticize this community. Right? We think about community as already existing, but community is something that takes work, something that has to be constructed daily. But second, the idea that if we are going to build a better world, a better community, we have to work. And the work that Lauren describes and delineates is not work according to capitalism, but a type of work that sustains community. And I think this makes an important intervention against certain leftist conceptions that tries to imagine a world without work, right? That sees work as a bad thing and work that's associated with capitalism, and imagine socialism as a time when we'd be post-work. And I really love Butler's insight because for me, it suggests that to build a socially just world, to build a utopia, we'll always need to work. We'll never have to stop working. And work can be liberating. Work is essential to who we are. But again, not work dictated by the mandates of capitalism, which is exploiting our labor for the purposes of profit alone. This is a type of work we do to build community, to build ourselves, to build a more loving place, to build a place where both ourselves and others can flourish. And that's a type of work we need to do with our hands, with our body, with our emotions, with our minds. But we'll never have to stop working. But what becomes dissolved is this false binary that develops in capitalism, that the opposite of work is play. No, the opposite of work isn't play. Maybe in a really free society, work and play become synonymous. And not to go off on a tangent, I want to end this mini lecture, but I think we've glimpsed the type of utopian promise of work when we do work that's meaningful. Again, that might not be at your job, but the work of playing with your children, of doing creative work, of work of helping a neighbor or a friend do something, right? That work that's helping build community, work that's building minds, work that's building our imagination. In that work, we feel so full and free. And at least for me, this becomes the ultimate parable. We need to work, we need to build community, and we need to build that community even on spaces that have been poisoned, that are toxic, where violence has occurred and will likely occur again. As Lauren says, there are no guarantees anywhere. And nevertheless, We have a responsibility to build community, to work, and to do the good work.